Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. My name is Bill Karger, and with me is Steve Schneider, and we're the co-presidents of Brotherhood here at Temple Beth Am. So we want to welcome everybody to our very first Brotherhood Breakfast Zoom call. As we all know, it's been a very difficult and challenging year with COVID-19. Brotherhood continues to think of ways to offer programs to you, but certainly welcome suggestions from our membership. We want to thank those who have continued to support Brotherhood with paying their dues. We have discounted dues for the 2021 season, given COVID-19, to $45 for the regulars and $32.50 for seniors. I'm actually going to just let everyone know, if you could please stay on mute and while we're talking, and then when I turn it over to Rav Sam Blumberg, he will be able to unmute you and answer questions as needed. For today's presentation, we are honoring our veterans. We had Larry Herson from Jewish War Veterans, who will say a special prayer. However, we are trying to locate him at this time. So what I might do is turn it right over to Rav Blumberg, who will say the motzi. Rav's presentation today will be on military service, requirements, and exemption. I want to special thank you to both of them for participating in this event, especially to Rav Blumberg for really taking on this presentation in this Zoom, and also a special thank you to Bill Rapkin at Access Framingham. This program will be available via Access Framingham in the near future. For anyone who has questions, please raise your hand or type them into the chat. And again, Rav or I will address them. We have an hour today, and we'll do our best to get to everyone's questions. Now I will turn to Rav Blumberg to say the motzi to start us off. Rav?
Thanks so much, Bill. And thanks so much for asking me to be here today. I feel really, really honored to be a part of this morning. If you have something bready or you have something else that you're eating this morning, of course, I know this is different. Wish we could all be in the same place enjoying breakfast together, but this will have to do. I brought a little bagel with cream cheese so I could say motzi. And we thank God for the gift of food. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Rav. I'll let you have a couple of bites. I was hoping that Larry would be able to join us at this point in time. I don't see Larry. I will turn it back over to Rav to start us off with his presentation.
Great. I'm ready. I won't continue to eat throughout, so I won't need to take 20 seconds in between everything I say. Thank you again to Bill and to Steve for inviting me, for asking me to be here today and asking me to speak. My specialty is Jewish text and Judaism and Jewish thought, and so I'm looking forward to sharing with you a little bit today. Military service in Judaism, requirement and exemption. Judaism. My working thesis is that Torah and Jewish text are relevant to us today. That we can incorporate the words that were written thousands of years ago that have divine power to them, and that we can help use them to help inform our lives. And so that's my hope this morning, is that the text that I share will give us an insight into thinking about what it means to serve, what it means to show up for your country and for your people, and what it means to sacrifice, to upend a person's life so that they can serve a higher purpose and serve their country. And we want to give thanks to our veterans this morning. We say at the Seder, why is this night, at the Passover Seder, why is this night different from all other nights? Well, this Veterans Day was different than any other Veterans Day that came before. And, if we were in person, we would really want to bring up and honor those who served our country. Hakarat HaTov, recognizing the good, giving gratitude, is an incredibly important Jewish value. So I have things that I want to share. I have some text to share this morning. But I would really love to start by honoring our veterans by name and by, excuse me, asking them if they're comfortable doing so, just telling us your name, when and where you served, and if you'd like to share just a brief something you're thinking about this as we pass this Veterans Day, something that came up for you or that you're thinking about. We would really love to be able to honor you in that way. If you're not comfortable sharing for whatever reason, I know I'm sort of putting you on the spot, but would love to hear from any veterans who are willing to share this morning. So I'm going to ask actually if you'd like to just say your name, when and where you served, and a little bit about your service or something you're thinking about. Can you just maybe raise your hand now or put your name into the chat, and I'll make sure to make note, and we'll get to everybody. All right, George, I'm gonna unmute you so you can say a word or two if you don't mind.
I served during the Korean conflict, and fortunately, I was not hurt. I came back, raised my family, and I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to serve this country.
George, thank you so much. We really thank you for your service. Thank you for sharing. Dennis? There we go.
Good morning, Rav. I enlisted in the Army, well, actually the National Guard, in 1965 during the big push for Vietnam. I was in the Guard for 6.5 years, transferred to the Army Reserve. In 1968, I went to Mass Military Academy, got commissioned as second lieutenant. After a total of 18 years, I got RIFT, which is reduced in force, and at the rank of major. Never left the country, but glad to serve with what I did.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you for your service to this country, and so glad that you're with us today. Thank you so much to Dennis and to George, and we're honored that you're with us this morning, and we thank you for your service. So, again, my specialty is Jewish text, and so I'm hoping that the text that I share this morning, and it's a very brief sampling of some Jewish texts on the subject, but I'm hoping that they will help us shed some light, help us think a little bit about what it means to serve. And I'm going to try and give as much context because we're just kind of jumping into some Torah texts. I don't assume that anybody has especially a big background necessarily in Jewish text. So I'm going to try and give as much background as possible. If you have thoughts or questions as we go along, the easiest way probably would be for you to put them in the chat. But we'll try and kind of also look around and see, if you want to either just raise your hand or you can go under participants. I've never found it to be especially easy to do, but you can go under participants and raise your hand there. And maybe Bill Rabkin or Bill Karger or Steve can notify me. Just let me know and jump in if there are people who are doing that and I'm not noticing. Great. I'm just, I want this to be conversational, so I'm happy for people to jump in. I'll also try and give some time at the end for any questions or comments that you might have. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to be sharing my screen quite a bit this morning to share some of these texts so that you can see them. I know I'm a visual person, and I need to see them. So we're going to start at the very beginning of the book of Numbers. So 5 books of the Torah, and we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and then Numbers. So Genesis, the beginning of the world, the stories of our patriarchs and matriarchs, ending with the death of Joseph, and then moving into the book of Exodus is slavery in Egypt, freedom from Egypt with God's help and with Moses' help, and then some laws. The receiving of the 10 Commandments, the building of a tabernacle, a special place where God would dwell and sort of commune with the Israelite people. That's the book of Exodus. The book of Leviticus is a lot of laws for the priests, a lot of laws about sacrifice, the things that we don't really do anymore because we don't have a centralized temple. There's not going to be a quiz or test at the end of this, so I'm just trying to kind of give us some background. Then we have the book of Numbers. So we get to the very beginning of the book of Numbers, and the Israelites are in the desert. They're wandering through. They're trying to make it, again, they've left Egypt, but they're trying to make it to the land of Israel, which God has promised them. And that's where we pick up. So the very, 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 very beginning of the book of Numbers, I want to share with you today, because it gives us an insight into requirement and military service. So the book of Numbers gets its name because there are a lot of numbers in it, and it begins with a census. And it says, on the first day of the second month, in the second year following the exodus from the land of Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting, saying, take a census of the whole Israelite community by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing the names, every male, head by head. You and Aaron, that's Moses' brother, shall record them by their groups from the age of 20 years up, all those in Israel who are able to bear arms. So the very beginning of the book of Numbers, we have this census, and it's not a census, we try and read the Torah with an egalitarian lens, and we do our best to do that, but this is quite clear that we're taking a census of all of the males in the Israelite community. And why? It says from 20 years and up, right, considered to be, we might say, an adult, and those who are able to bear arms, those who are able to serve their people and to wage war if needed. The Israelites know that they're going to be going through territories where other people are settled. We actually see throughout the Torah and throughout the book of Numbers, especially, some of these battles that are waged because the Israelites are even just trying to pass through, not necessarily to settle a land, but just trying to pass through. And other nations are wary of that. So here we have, and I wanted to just kind of focus on this ending piece here, from the age of 20 years up, all of those in Israel who are able to bear arms. And I'm going to bring a couple, I think I have one or two commentaries on this. So the Torah does not exist in a vacuum. Like I said, it's relevant for us today, and it's been relevant for several thousand years since it was first written down. It's been discussed and pored over, and we have different commentaries. So I want to share a couple of those commentaries today. The first is, and I hope that you can see this, this is Rashi. So Rashi is a French commentator from the 11th century. He's really, one of the most foremost commentators on the Torah. We kind of turn to him first when we're looking to understand a passage from the Torah. So Rashi's explanation, his comment here, it might be straightforward, but he's reminding us that this tells us, right? This part of the Torah tells us that no one less than 20 years of age goes forth to the army. And so I'm hoping that what we'll be able to do is think about those who served today, is to recognize, again, their sacrifice, recognize the tender age that many who go into the service are at. It's a difficult time in life. Often, if someone was drafted at the age of 18, or they're just starting a family, and we're gonna see things like that as well. Whatever it is, it's a sacrifice. It's putting a pause on a person's life, and we want to sort of recognize the humanity in that and the difficulty in serving one's people or one's nation. So that's Rashi there, and I'm going to also share Rashbam. So Rashbam is Rashi's grandson. So he's more like 12th century, also in France. And he also comments on the Torah. So he says, so remember what I was saying about sort of where the Israelites are in the grand scheme of things in terms of the Torah. So he says, from this point on, the Israelites were headed for the land of Israel. and all males over the age of 20 were enlisted in the army for that purpose. God issued the command to count the people so that one could keep track of how many soldiers there were and could know if any have become casualties in war. So this was to know who was able to fight if need be, and also to take accounting beforehand, and to know if some were lost in battle, how many that would have been. I'm going to pause for a second just to see if anyone has thoughts or questions about that before we move on to the next text. Great. All good. All good. I wasn't necessarily expecting that there would be, but wanted to pause for a moment in case there were. Great. So I'm going to share a little bit of background before sharing the next text. The next text is also from the book of Numbers. It's from Numbers chapter 32. So between Numbers chapter 1 and Numbers chapter 32, we have this really sort of seminal moment for the Israelites. Moses sends out one person from every tribe of the Israelites, and he says, all right, you guys go ahead of us. You guys go and scout out the land of Israel. Go in quietly, see what it's like. Tell us what the land is like. Tell us if it's fortified, if it's going to be really difficult to conquer and to settle the land. We need to sort of know in advance, right? Scout out the land and know what it's going to be like for when we get there, because at this point, it's sort of hard for us to, it's hard for me sometimes to remember this, but it was really supposed to be a quick thing that the Israelites got into the land of Israel, right? We know, we hear about 40 years in the desert, but the 40 years is because of this, this moment where the spies are sent out. They come back, the 12 spies come back from scouting out the land of Israel. 10 of them come back with a negative report. They say, guys, this is really tough. This is not going to be easy for us. The land is fortified. The soil, we're not really sure how it's going to be to grow crops. We're actually really, really worried about this. And two of the Israelites who had been sent out, that's Caleb and Joshua, they come back and they say, actually, it was fortified, but we're going to be able to do it. We're going to be able to conquer the land, and we're going to be able to take it and to settle the land, and it's going to be fine with God's help, right? We're going to be able to do it. But the Israelite people, they only really hear this negative report, right? And the majority of people, these 10 people, they hear this majority report and they freak out, basically. They are really scared. They say, we're just going to die here in the desert, and it's going to be awful for us. Well, that doesn't make God very happy. God says, what, you don't have any faith in me? I took you out of the land of Egypt. I'm bringing you towards the land of Israel. I'm going to help you, and we're going to be able to do this. So the decree at that point is, God says, the Israelites just don't have faith in me. The people who are alive today, who saw when I took the Israelite people out of the land of Egypt, they are not the people, they are not the generation who are going to be able to go into the land of Israel. There's going to be 40 years of wandering in the desert. And so much of the book of Numbers is that wandering. We actually kind of skip from the second to more like the 40th year within the book of Numbers. But we get that decree, which is that generation that left the land of Egypt is not going to be the same generation that goes into the land of Israel. So I'm bringing us to Numbers chapter 32. And remember that the 12 tribes think that they're all going to settle the land of Israel, that they're all going to get basically an apportionment in the land of Israel, except for the Levites, who will have their own sort of areas in some of the cities, in some of the other tribal areas. But that everybody will have a portion of the land of Israel. Every tribe will be able to settle, and that's the idea. So that brings us to Numbers chapter 32. So this is the tribe of Reuben and the tribe of Gad, not G-O-D God, but G-A-D God, spelled Gimel Daled in Hebrew. So the Reubenites, the tribe of Reuben, and the Gadites, that is the tribe of Gad, they own cattle in very large numbers. Noting that the lands of Yazer and Gilad were a region suitable for cattle, the Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the chieftains of the community, and they said, the land that the Lord has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country. Right? This area, this is just after a battle on the other side of the Jordan River, not yet in the land of Israel, but it's cattle country, and your servants have cattle. It would be a favor to us, they continued, if this land were given to your servants as a holding. Do not move us across the Jordan to the land of Israel. Right? They have a lot of cattle. They see this amazing grass, I assume, for their cattle. It's good for grazing. And they don't want to go with the rest of the Israelites into the land of Israel. They want to stay there to be able to graze their cattle and to have that land. So here's Moses' reply. Moses replied to the Gadites and the Reubenites, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given them? That is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to survey the land. So this is a reference to the 12 spies. After going up to the Wadi Eshkol and surveying the land, they turned the minds of the Israelites from invading the land that the Lord had given them. Thereupon the Lord was incensed and swore, none of the men from 20 years up who came out of Egypt shall see the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they did not remain loyal to me. None except Caleb, son of Yefuneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they remained loyal to the Lord. Those were the ones who came back with a positive report. The Lord was incensed at Israel. This is still Moses reminding the Reubenites and the Gadites. The Lord was incensed at Israel and for 40 years made them wander in the wilderness until the whole generation that had provoked the Lord's displeasure was gone. And now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers to add still further to the Lord's wrath against Israel. If you turn away from God and God abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity upon all this people. Then they stepped up to him and said, we will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. And we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion. But we will not have a share with them in the territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan. So we see here some of the Israelites, a few of the tribes saying, we don't want to go through, we don't want to go with our people into the land of Israel. And Moses says, what are you talking about? You are a part of this people. You are required to come with us, to help us. We know that it's not going to be easy getting into the land of Israel and settling the land. We know that there are other peoples there who will need to be, the Torah often uses the word dispossessed, right? But there will be wars, there will be battles, and we'll need your help in fighting them. And the Reubenites and the Gadites here, and the half tribe of Manasseh who end up joining them, they say, you're right. We feel that sense of obligation. We feel that we need and want to help you through this. Let us stay here for now. Let us build up some cities. Let us leave our children and our wives in these cities, and we will come help you. We will be the shock troops for you, which I sort of had to look up. I'm not especially well versed in military jargon, but shock troops. So I wanted to bring one commentary on here. This is Chizkuni. Chizkuni is 13th century France. So I was looking, I wrote down just a couple notes. I have 11th century France, 12th century France, 13th century France, and then we'll get also to a commentary from Spain this morning. But Chizkuni says, these tribes promised, after first having settled their families and livestock, not only to fight along the other tribes, but to do so in the most exposed positions. They would be able to do so precisely because they would not be encumbered by their families and livestock. They would lead the fight on behalf of the people, just as they also had taken the lead in settling their families. So we get here a bit of the foreshadowing that I'm going to get to in the exemption section. But Chizkuni is saying it actually might be beneficial. I'm going to stop this for a second. It actually might be beneficial to the Israelites as a whole that the Reubenites and the Gadites stay behind, that they are able to leave their families settled already in an area, that they know that they'll be safe there, and that they'll then be able to go sort of unencumbered. They'll be able to fight on behalf of the Israelites. They'll be able to help them settle the land of Israel. That's what I have for my requirement section. And I'm curious if anybody has thoughts or questions about that before we move on to talking a little bit about exemption. Great. A reminder that if you do have questions or thoughts, you're welcome to share them in the chat as we go along. Great. So I want to get to exemption now. And these texts are going to come from the book of Deuteronomy. So I brought us through Numbers chapter 32. I think there are about 40 chapters in the book of Numbers altogether. And the book of Deuteronomy is primarily a very, very long speech from Moses. A lot of it is a retelling of the previous 40 years. It's basically like the final month that the Israelites are in the desert. It's the final month of Moses' life because he learns that he's not going to be able to cross over with the Israelite people. And we also get many actually laws in terms of war, in terms of battle. And I want to bring just a couple today that speak to exemptions. And the reason that I wanted to bring exemption from service today is really, again, to help us think about what a sacrifice it is when a person chooses to leave what they have behind and to go fight for their country or for their people. So I'm going to share from Deuteronomy chapter 20. Here we go. So this is Moses speaking. He says, "Before you join battle, the priest shall come forward and address the troops. He shall say to them, 'Shema Yisrael.'" Shema Yisrael, right? That might be familiar. "Hear, O Israel, you are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. Do not be in fear or in panic or in dread of them. For it is the Lord your God who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy to bring you victory." That's the priest's pep talk. "Then the officials shall address the troops as follows. Is there anyone who has built a new house but has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another dedicate it. Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has never harvested it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another harvest it. Is there anyone who has become engaged to a woman, but who has not yet married her? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another marry her." So we have three examples here of people who have an out, sort of, right? We saw before that there's something really important to all of the Israelite men, 20 years and up, going into battle together, to being a part of something, of serving together. And here we see three exemptions that would allow a person to go back home, to say, I'm not going to be able to serve because I either have built a new house and haven't been able to dedicate it yet, or I've planted a vineyard and I haven't yet harvested it, or I'm engaged to a woman. There's a woman back home, and I'm not going to be able to marry her, and perhaps that person will die in battle and will never be able to marry her, and someone else will. Yeah, Dan, great, thanks for raising your hand.
Would these have been offers to allow them to go back to their homes, or requirements to go back to their homes?
That's an awesome question. What's your intuition?
It sounds more like a requirement, that the instructions would be that to not allow your vineyard to have been harvested would be an affront, to not allow your engaged wife to fully complete the marriage would be an affront, and was more of a demand than a suggestion or a request.
Great. That's my sense too. I don't know if they would have physically removed a person if they said, no, I want to, because we think about requirement and exemption, and we also think about volunteerism, that they might say, I want to go anyway. The one with the woman, I'll just say briefly, it's tricky. In Jewish law, there are issues around engagement without marriage, and sort of being in a liminal status where if one of the partners were to die or be lost at sea, it's sort of a major issue as to how do we dissolve that engagement. Can that person then marry another person? If they didn't know if the man had died or not in battle, would she be free to marry someone else? It's actually the reason that traditionally at a Jewish wedding, we don't consider a person engaged. We don't actually do engagement called erusin or kiddushin until the marriage ceremony itself. We have about 20 minutes technically in Jewish law between engagement, like formal engagement, and being married, because we're so worried about that liminal time. So my sense also would be, and in the language here, we have Yelech veyashov leveto, he should go and he should return home. So it feels pretty forceful here. And it's a great question, Dan, especially in light of, I'm going to be bringing just briefly a little bit about Israel, and thinking about compulsory serving in the military versus volunteering. So it's a great question, and I think actually the commentaries are going to speak to it too. And Steve is asking, why is the dedication of a house important? That's a great question. Clearly, it was one of the three things that was important enough to actually not go to battle for. So let's see. I'm hoping that these commentaries will shed some light on that and maybe help us answer that question. So this is Chizkuni again, 13th century France. So he comments on the phrase, "Let him go back to his home, lest he die." So he says, since his whole heart and his desire is to finish what he started, and his heart is not in the war, that's why he should go back to his home, right? He wants to finish what he started. His heart is back in his vineyard, or with his fiance, or in this house that he hasn't had a chance to live in yet. Consequently, and I think this is really important and speaks both to Dan's question and Steve's question, which is, consequently, he will flee and he will induce others to flee. Meaning his heart won't be fully in his service to his people. And we are worried that he's going to, maybe too easily want to go back home. He's going to say, guys, we got to get out of here, because he has that, I keep doing this. It's a pull on his heart. And I'm mostly trying to, sort of let us, I'm going to let our own minds do the work in thinking about those who have served our country and the circumstances under which they left to go serve and put a pause on their life, but that pull, that desire, to know that there's something or someone back home is really, really strong. And so Jewish law gives an exemption for people who have that pull in such a way. And I want to look at one more commentary here. This is Rashbam again, 12th century France, Rashi's grandson. He says, for someone might take it to heart and worry when they go to battle, saying, my fate might be that I will never get to initiate my new house, my new marriage with my wife, or my new vineyard. Could it be that that is why my fate is to go to war just now? For that reason, they would be afraid of dying in battle. So similar to Chizkuni, but a little bit different, right? It's still about wanting to finish what a person started, but Rashbam brings in this fatalism, which is to say, maybe it's preordained that I'm being asked to go to war right now. Maybe that would cause a person to sort of give up, to not give their all. We could see it the other way too, which is to say, I really, really want to get back home. I really am going to fight and do all I can for my people, for my country, so that I can get back. But we also see this other side of it here with Rashbam, which is a sort of fatalism to say, I don't know. I just don't know. Maybe I'm not meant to live through this. And again, I think it's really important to be getting into the mindset and trying to bring ourselves to that place of what it means to sacrifice and what it means to leave something behind for military service. Any thoughts or questions about that before I move on to what's going to be next in the Deuteronomy text? Yeah, George. Oh, hold on one second. I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
There doesn't seem to me that there was an exception because of health conditions of not serving. It seems that it is assumed that everybody can participate at the war, but there doesn't seem to be, from what I heard, exception if somebody was not qualified or physically not able. Is there any evidence of that?
That's a great question, George. Thank you for bringing that up. The short answer is I don't know a specific text off the top of my head. Again, this is not. I'm not bringing all of the texts around war and service and requirement. If it's not in the Torah itself, I imagine that it's in the Talmud, the later commentaries that would say that would give us more exemptions on a person who is not physically qualified or able to serve. The next text actually that I'm going to show might give an out for that person too. So hold on to that question. And George, if I'm going to find that in the meantime and follow up with you because I'm curious as well. So thanks for bringing that up. All right, I'm gonna show us this next text here. Then this is the continuation. So we had before, right? Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard, built a home, engaged a woman? Let that person go back. This is the continuation of that text. It says, "The officials shall go on addressing the troops and say, 'Is there anyone afraid and disheartened? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his.' When the officials have finished addressing the troops, army commanders shall assume command of the troops." So here we see another out, right? This is another out for people who are afraid and disheartened. We might say that a person who knows that they're not in a proper physical condition to serve would probably be afraid and disheartened. So that might be their out here. And I want to I'm bringing two commentaries here. This is Ibn Ezra, who's from 12th century Spain. And he says, what does it mean that it says afraid and disheartened? It kind of seems repetitive, right? Why do we need to say it twice? The Torah, there's an understanding that the Torah does not repeat itself. The Torah it is exacting with all the language that it uses. So Ibn Ezra says, afraid means afraid to strike another person, right? This is a reality of war. This is a reality of battle. So this person might be afraid to strike another person, or they're disheartened from thinking about suffering the blows from withstanding physical harm from others. And if there's a person who's not able to take that, then they also have an out here. They also get to go home according to the Torah. It takes a real mental toll on a person to serve, right? And to think about what might befall them in going out. Even those who are enlisting and don't necessarily expect to go into battle, never know exactly what might happen. And this exemption that the Torah gives, I think, is really important for us to keep in mind, to think about that mental, emotional, and also thinking about the physical toll that war can take on a person. I'm also going to bring Chizkuni here. I think this is really important in thinking about exemption, but not full exemption. He says, let him go back to his home. Let this person who's afraid or disheartened go back to their home. And those will be the people who bring food and water to the soldiers. Whereas one who has built a house or planted a vineyard or engaged a woman is fully exempt, doesn't even bring food and water. But when we think about requirement and exemption, we think about gradations, basically, is what what Chizkuni is saying here, is that even though that person who's afraid or disheartened doesn't go into battle themselves, it doesn't mean that they go home and sit on the couch. This is a person who still needs to help provide the soldiers, provide the army with rations, with food, and with water, which is really important as well. I think about my grandfather, who was a meteorologist in the U.S. Air Force and was really, really proud of his service. And there are so many different ways to serve, and there are so many different ways that we want to honor those people who have stood up and who have served their country. I'm just going to bring one quick text. This is from the book of Judges. So the book of Judges is after the settlement of the land of Israel under Joshua. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is the Torah, what we call the Torah. And then we get into the writings of the prophets, which begins with the book of Joshua, who takes over after Moses. And he helps the Israelites settle the land of Israel. He helps lead them in those battles. After that, after the land is settled, we have the book of Judges. It was a time when there was no central authority in the land of Israel, but tribal judges were sort of military, not necessarily how we think about judges, but were mostly military leaders who also had prophecy in them. They had sort of divine inspiration. And Gideon was one of those judges. So we see, actually, and we see this Deuteronomy exemption being played out. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many troops with you for me to deliver Midian into their hands." Israel might claim for themselves the glory due to me, thinking, our own hand has brought us victory. Right? If there are too many people going to battle, and this, I'm not getting into this so much today with sort of the God is fighting on behalf of the people, but if there are, a million Israelite troops against 25 of the foreign enemy, they're not going to give the glory to God. They're not going to say, God helped us through this. So God's saying here, too many. You have too many troops going into battle. Therefore, announce to the men, let anybody who is timid and fearful turn back, as a bird flies from Mount Gilead. Thereupon, 22,000 of the troops turned back, and 10,000 remained. So just getting a sense, and I thought it was really interesting to think that essentially 2/3 of the troops who were given this out here in the book of Judges said, I'm going to turn back. It's not for everyone, right? We are timid and fearful, and this is not for us. We're going to go back. 22,000 turned back, and 10,000 remained. Again, seeing that Deuteronomy text being played out. Questions or thoughts about that before I get to just the final piece here? All right. So Finally, this morning, I didn't bring a lot of texts for this, but I'm thinking about military service in the state of Israel, right? The Jewish state that was founded in 1948, which has mandated conscription into the service after high school, 3 years for young men and 2 years for young women, basically at 18 years old. And you can imagine that this made a lot of sense for the new state, especially in 1948, who were facing hostile neighbors basically all around them. The day after statehood was declared, there was the war. There was a war of 1948, and before that, there had been sort of smaller groups of military members, but not necessarily one Israeli military force. So part of the creation of the state was that everybody would serve, and so I'm just thinking about that in terms of requirement and exemption. There are exemptions. One famous one is that in 1948, David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, he met with the heads of basically the ultra-Orthodox communities, and he found a compromise with them that the ultra-Orthodox essentially would not serve in the army. You'll remember that 1948 is only 3 years after the end of World War II, and after the Holocaust. Many ultra-Orthodox, or not necessarily called ultra-Orthodox, but Jewish Orthodox learning centers and Hasidim and whole communities were wiped out in the Holocaust, and so some Jews and Orthodox people, especially who came to the land of Israel, would not have wanted to serve in the army. So David Ben-Gurion reached a compromise with those heads. It's colloquially sort of known as Torah to Omunato, meaning one's Torah is their craft. That is the thing that they do, and it's remained a really incredibly contentious idea in Israeli society that some ultra-Orthodox don't serve in the army. There are sometimes arrangements where after high school they'll go to a yeshiva, a learning center, for some time. They'll get a deferment. Sometimes they won't serve. Sometimes they volunteer to serve. There are whole platoons in the Israeli army that are made up of ultra-Orthodox. So, I certainly don't mean to paint a broad brush, and this is not to cast judgment at all, even though it's very contentious in Israeli society, because it's a community that is precarious, right, and still has hostile neighbors, and wants to make sure that they can defend themselves. And we think about what it means to stand up and to be a part of the country, to be a part of the nation. And another group that I just want to mention that is exempt from military service, but sometimes, again, going back to Dan's question, sometimes volunteers to serve, is the Arab Israeli population, which makes up 20% of Israel's population. There's not that requirement to serve for the Arab Israeli population either. I was thinking about, Veterans Day in Israeli society. There's no such thing as Veterans Day in Israeli society because almost everyone is a veteran, right? Almost everyone has served their country. There is the equivalent of Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance, which then goes directly into Yom HaAtzmaut, which is the Day of Independence. So if you've ever been in Israel during that time, it's a day of mourning. It's a really, really sad, difficult day because it's Memorial Day. There are tekasim, there are ceremonies at military cemeteries, big speeches. Almost everyone, if not everyone in Israeli society, knows someone who was killed fighting for their country. And that night, there's what's called a tekes ma'avar. There's a a ceremony of changing over, from going from this intense day of mourning to an intense day of celebration. It's Yom HaAtzmaut. It's the Day of Independence. There are parties, and so Israel holds within itself sort of that knowing, that deep sadness and also the deep celebration that comes from having an independent state. So I wanted to end today by sharing one poem that I thought would be appropriate. It's from an Israeli poet named Natan Alterman. It's called "The Silver Platter." So I'm gonna share that now, and I think it really speaks to this idea of what it means to give of oneself for one's country and for one's people. So I hope you can see on the bottom here, it says, the state, this is a quote from Chaim Weizmann, who was the first president of Israel. He said, the state will not be given to the Jewish people on a silver platter, meaning it's not going to be easy. In 1947, right, when they're thinking about statehood, we know it's not going to be easy to, even if the United Nations says, that there should be a Jewish state in Palestine, in the land of Israel, that it's not going to be easy for us. We're going to have to fight. And so this is a poem written by Natan Alterman, who lived 1910 to 1970, called "The Silver Platter." The earth grows still. The lurid sky slowly pales over smoking borders. Heartsick but still living, a people stand by to greet the uniqueness of the miracle. Readied, they wait beneath the moon, wrapped in awesome joy before the light. Then, soon, a girl and boy step forward and slowly walk before the waiting nation. In work garb and heavy shod, they climb in stillness. Wearing yet the dress of battle, the grime of aching day and fire-filled night. Unwashed, weary unto death, not knowing rest, but wearing youth like dewdrops in their hair. Silently the two approach and stand. Are they of the quick or of the dead? Through wondering tears the people stare. Who are you, the silent two? And they reply, we are the silver platter upon which the Jewish state was served to you. And speaking, fall in shadow at the nation's feet. Let the rest in Israel's chronicles be told. Thank you to all who have served. I hope that this talk and these texts this morning shed a little bit of light, bring into focus a little bit what it means to sacrifice and to give for one's nation, for one's people. And thanks again to Billy and to Steve for bringing me on this morning. Happy to follow up if there are any questions. You can either raise a hand or put it in the chat. And I know that we just have a couple minutes this morning.
The poem was very moving. I read it a few times while you were reading it, and the introduction was very appropriate, and I found that part to be especially meaningful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Right, and a special thank you, Rav, to you and putting this presentation together for our veterans. I know I agree with Dan completely. Very moving poem. So again, thank you very much for dedicating your time to our veterans and to us and helping out with this, with our breakfast today or our event today. So again, thank you. I'm just going to wrap up real quick. Hopefully everybody enjoyed Rav's presentation. They learned from it. Again, thank you very much to the veterans for serving. Just want to say that please keep an eye out for any future communications from Brotherhood. We'll do our best to put together programs or events similar to this in the near future. And happy Thanksgiving. Everybody stay safe and healthy. Thank you.